Hello and welcome to Script and Pencils, the comic creator interview podcast from the Comic Crush. I'm your host, Paul, as always. In a minute, we're going to be joined by John Harris Dunning, the writer of Wiper, a brand new OGN from Dark Horse Comics. It's out today. I hope you're all going to go out there and pick it up. I've read this. It's a fantastic Blade Runner-esque adventure that is really going to be a great piece of modern comic sci-fi, and I really hope you guys are going to go pick it up. John himself, who you'll be meeting in a moment, will be at Gosh Comics tomorrow night. So if you're listening to this on Wednesday, he'll be there Thursday, the 17th of November, from 7 p.m. signing and introducing you guys to his book. So it's a whole kind of evening from 7 till 9 p.m. It's going to be fantastic. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope you guys are. I hope you've seen John's work, particularly Tumult, the OGN he did with Michael Kennedy a while back. So let's get him on, and we're going to talk about this. But first, here's me. Hello. And let's welcome John.
Hey.
Hello.
Dude.
How you doing?
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too, man. I always love our chats on comics, and today should be no exception.
We went public with them, man. We can't keep our wonderful insights to ourselves anymore. The world must know.
I'm not sure some of them are repeatable, John.
True.
There's a dark side to us all, I'm sure. Speaking of dark sides, I'm sorry for anyone watching. Having a bit of a problem with the light today, but you don't need to see my face. You just need to see this lovely man here. So occasionally I will pop on as the clouds shift and things. Sorry we'll consider that a technical problem. John, it is great to see you out here with another graphic novel.
Thanks,
I loved Tumult, which was the last time we actually talked on record, as it were.
Yeah, true.
Which was back in 2016, I want to say.
Yeah.
Christ, it's been too long. Now, before we get into what happened in that sort of in-between period, we've got to kind of chat about this book. I really enjoyed it. It's a great kind of melding of noir and science fiction and a little Afro-futurism in there, but also some other interesting things. And it concerns memory, and I guess you could say how memories can be weaponized. Can you talk a bit, firstly, about what the book is about for the audience, and then the kind of genesis of those ideas and how you got to this form?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's interesting because the mechanic that this book works on is memory, and I mean, just to sort of put it very simply, the book is called Wiper, and it's basically titled after the main character, who's this lady called Lula Nomi. And what she is a private detective, and she guarantees complete discretion because after each job she does, her memories wipe clean. So she can't remember the job at all, but it also wipes her personality or her memories, all memories with it. So there's a sort of class of people who are basically going around with no memories. So that's, as you say, memory is absolutely central to this. But for me, it's not so much about memory. It's more like how memory builds identity. And I don't want to sound like David Lynch here, although obviously who could sound anything better than David Lynch. But I'm not being sort of oblique about what this is about. But I do believe that with any narrative, obviously, people will read it, and what they will take out of it and what becomes important to them is probably different from what would be important for me, important for you. But if we're asking about what the inspiration is, it was about that. It's like, how do we remember ourselves, and how do we build narratives out of our memories and our past and our backgrounds? And if I'm going to sort of cut to the quick about it, really, I think it's to do with my own background about sort of growing up gay, in South Africa, quite a conservative environment, and how that sort of impacted my identity as a man. And then also growing up in South Africa, going through a big transition between like apartheid era South Africa, where we were in a complete state of emergency media-wise. So we didn't get any television, films, newspapers, magazines, anything except for comics, which is why one of my main obsessions with comics was the only thing they got to do, because they were like, this is such trash. Like, it just can't be any threat to the regime. And then seeing that transition to like when Mandela came out and there was the end of apartheid and the whole society changed so radically, so much for the better, obviously. And just how all of those things, how all of those narratives conflicted, and kind of how you make an identity out of those things. Obviously, it's not directly about that, but I think if you really dig under the surface, that's what it's about. And I actually think it's very timely because, you know, I think this idea of identity and how people form their identity, whether that's sexuality or gender or, you know, where they come from, you know, I think that's really at the fore of people's minds. And it's a real kind of serious topic in cultural discussions now. I'm going to say culture wars, but hopefully you just also have some cultural discussions. It's not always a war to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, and there's a fine line, I think, for people now between that and actually so much so that they can't necessarily tell the difference, which is really unfortunate, because you see that spring up into some quite harmful verbal conflicts and ideological conflicts. You did choose to kind of set this book in Joburg, and was it interesting? I mean, do you go home much physically yourself? Do you go back to South Africa often?
Not massively, but I have to say, again, it's nice that you drill down into that, because, you know, as a kid, I mean, I love Blade Runner. It was amazing. I love Alien. You know, I was consuming this incredible science fiction that, you know, still some of the best science fiction that's ever been produced. 2000 AD. I actually bought some. I bought some show and tell.
Oh, nice.
That we can go through. You know, but I mean, you know, just in brief, I mean, it's like, you know, sort of the fact that this weekly comic was coming out with like Simon Bisley doing, you know, doing ABC Warriors, and just what that artwork looked like sort of weekly was just absolutely amazing.
I'm gonna just put you up on your own there, John, if I can. Okay. I've just got to figure out how to do that.
Okay.
Oh no, there we go. I can't do it. There you go. No, no, hold on. There we go. Go on. Go ahead. Show it.
For instance, like, so show and tell, like, I mean, I don't think it's too dramatic a statement to say 2000 AD was possibly the best comic in the world at the time. I mean,
yeah,
this was a weekly, and this was like a series of Nemesis that was running at that point. And just look at what it looks like. Like, the interior artwork was so strange, so experimental. You know, or as I say, you know, you have this you had like Bisley doing 2000 AD. I mean, I'll actually never forget the week that he started and just opening up, you know, the comic and just seeing this incredible work by him. You know, it was amazing. It was so imaginative. You know, and then we had things like Bad Company, which again was just absolutely gorgeous. So I was consuming all of this material, but what was very odd was that none of it was based in South Africa or Africa, where I was living. So there was a sort of strange feeling of like being, I mean, nobody was creating comics, no one was publishing comics, no one was making films, no one was writing books, there was no publishing going on. So it just felt really odd. So I guess with this project, Wiper, I felt really important that I needed to write a story that was based where I came from, so that kids, you know, back in Africa and back in Johannesburg, where I was based, can read a science fiction and be like, yeah, it's in Johannesburg. I mean, why wouldn't it be?
And it's fascinating because it is kind of part of a sort of small wave that's happening now of African set and African made, in a way, sci-fi stories. Yeah. I'm thinking primarily of things like New Masters by Shobun Shoff, which came out recently on Image. which is set in Nigeria, futurist Nigeria, where aliens have landed, and you tread not entirely the same, but similar kind of themes and ideas in there, and I think that's great, and it's great to see those places and people's highlighted.
Yeah.
Do you think it lends itself, or do you think it comes from a feeling of kind of otherness?
No,
at least from those countries.
No, I think it comes from a feeling of newness.
Right.
Because there's something about Afro-futurism, which is about, like, you know, I mean, if you think about something like Sun Ra, and Space is the Place, which is kind of one of the great, probably the best primary, I mean, it's one of the primary Afro-futuristic sort of documents, but also I think it's the best up to now. You know, it's almost saying, like, as a gay black man growing up in the South of America, the only sane response was to go insane and to imagine yourself somewhere else. You couldn't grow up as a dignified human being without imagining you were living somewhere other than America. And we saw what happened to Prince, you know, as somebody who was, again, somebody who was a bit sort of gender fluid, and growing up as somebody of color in the US, you know, and then Michael Jackson. I mean, they all kind of lost their minds and felt like they had to change their bodies and change the way they, like, it was an almost impossible situation. And so I think that creates these really fierce needs for a completely new narrative, or a rewriting of the narrative. And that's what science fiction is, right? I mean, you know, just divorcing it from gender and race, science fiction has always been about, like, a complete rewriting of narratives and an opening and a creation of possibilities. That brings me onto my other really kind of central topic about Wiper, is I was absolutely determined to make optimistic science fiction.
Right.
Because that's what I grew up with. Like, all that 2000 AD stuff, it could be so dark, it could be pitch dark. It was very cynical, it was very political, it was all those things. But it was always optimistic. Like, you always felt like you wanted to go to those places and be there, even if it was really kind of scary and out of control, you know. And I think that's one of the things I worry about now that we've lost. You know, so much of science fiction now is dystopian. And, like, an example that I use, well, two that I could use is, you know, Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner, beautiful colors, you know, very messed up, whatever, but you want to go and visit that city. You want to go and hang out and buy noodles on the street. You know, you want to go to a nightclub with Chris there. You know, you want to be there. The second Blade Runner film, massively depressing. I have no interest in going there. It's grey. The palette is very grey. I mean, it's actually a good film. I mean, I wouldn't say, but I mean, it's an interesting, I mean, it's not like it's an unwatchable film. It's just really depressing. And even Dune, you know, you look at Lynch's Dune, which we could say there might be a few narrative issues with it. But you look at that place, and I mean, you want to go to all those places and be there. The new Dune, again, beige, grey, depressing. You know, it's like, it's just not what I want to watch. I'll give you another example of somebody who did it recently, who's super kind of optimistic and beautiful, is that's Mad Max Fury Road. Although, like, that's a really depressing world, it's just so much fun. The energy is so high, and, like, the costumes and the, you know, so that's what I wanted to do with Wiper, was, like, have, like, a buzz. I didn't want it to be a buzz film, because that's what we had, you know, like, I mean, as I say, with this kind of stuff, you know, this was, I mean, just the coloring, you know, I mean, the coloring in our book for Wiper was a major narrative thread, and Brad Simpson absolutely knocked the ball out of the park with it. But it was something we thought about an awful lot, because
I very much enjoyed the colours. They were gorgeous.
Great.
I mean, all these things do have one thing in common, I think, which is they can't imagine a future without some form of oppression. Do you think there's always going to be oppression, or do you have hope that there is, that we could perhaps move? I mean, it doesn't, certainly living in England now, it doesn't seem.
No, or America, or China, or everywhere. No, I'm always hopeful. But we've got a long way to go. I mean, even these conversations that are happening about gender and ethnicity now are such a basic level. That's so worrying. You know, it's like, even the arguments that have come out are sort of so basic that we're nowhere near overcoming them. But it's good that we're having them all. So in Wiper, what's happened is that, I start off with the complete obliteration of the West. So, Europe and America has basically gone. Kind of the sort of European people and, the sort of Western people are really just kind of really sort of low-level immigrants who've been allowed into Africa. And Africa is obviously booming. But then you have this hierarchy that's then being set up between robots and aliens, with humans at the top, and then robots probably second, and then aliens third. And the more like humans aliens look, the more acceptable they are. The less human they look, the sort of less acceptable they are. So what I'm also trying to show is that those things replicate themselves in a million different ways. And we have to be so careful of how that manifests, because it's not as straightforward as one thinks. It's something really intrinsic to us that we need to watch out for, I think.
And like, in terms of those things, in a way, when I look at robots in sci-fi, you always kind of think, I mean, someone was talking about this on Twitter the other day, and I think it was a bit of almost a kind of reactionary take about Star Wars, and basically saying, look, if the robots are sentient, then effectively this is slavery. And it's just like, yeah, but it's kind of I get where you're going with that, but it is a kind of almost reactionary take. And robots are often kind of shown as the serfs. They're either the oppressors or the serfs in sci-fi. But you actually create a kind of in-between world where they're fully sentient and almost kind of accepted as part of the human mix.
Well, I'll tell you one of the reasons why I would say that exists in the world of Wiper politically. It's like there's nothing to make allies than like more aliens. It's like, well, I mean, at least robots we made and we understand, but now there's aliens. So now, like, you may as well quickly make friends with the robots because like they're closer than the aliens are. So it's kind of so I think that's one of the things. I mean, it's funny writing science fiction about robots as well, because I don't believe in artificial intelligence. I mean, I just don't. It just doesn't exist. I mean, there's programmable computers that can do things and mimic. I mean, the very fact that the definition of artificial intelligence is being able to mimic and fool people in terms of, that doesn't imply consciousness to me at all. So I don't really believe in sort of a future where there's robot consciousness personally, but it's fun. It's fun as a sort of science fiction. Like it's a simple way of creating this rather wonderful class of other being, which I enjoy playing with. I don't really believe it.
But would you say that perhaps the ability to form memories and an emotional attachment to those memories would imply intelligence and imply sentience and consciousness?
Yeah.
Would that be
absolutely? Yeah.
Okay. In terms of that in the story, I mean, are there things that you think it's right for us to forget? Is it good to be able to lose touch with some of your memories over time, do you think? Or
the thing is, what I'm saying is I'm actually not making that judgment. I don't think so. I don't not think so, but we do it all the time. I mean, one of the examples I use is, I used to write quite comprehensive diaries until I was about 30, which, it's like, sort of mostly 14-year-old girls write diaries. So that was sort of my maturity level as well, and my basic psychology when I was 30. So some would argue I still am, but basically, so I'd write quite detailed diaries, and it would really blow my mind when I go and dig into these diaries from like 10 years ago, and I'd read some of the stuff, and it was like, I totally remember things completely differently.
Right.
I just don't remember saying certain things that I've written down. I don't remember feeling like that about certain things. And it became really clear to me that I've rewritten my narrative since. I've just remembered things differently, and I've moved things around. And if you asked me face to face today, what did you think of that? I'd tell you one thing. If I look back at the diary, it was something completely different.
But do you think? Do you think on a moral level that's? And I'm not saying you personally, like, oh, you're so immoral for doing it. On a moral level, is that right? Is it something we need to be able to do to survive? Do you think?
No, and I don't think it's moral. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's like sort of being sort of genocidal lunatic, and then being like, "Oh, I'm over it, and now I'm a lovely person." So no,
well, not that's fairly extreme.
That's not okay. But I'm just saying, so there is a moral component. No, that's not okay. But what I'm talking about more is just, I find it interesting that it's just how we work. We do change as people, and there's part of that about this graphic novel is obviously our detective has gone through some quite serious changes as she learns by the end. And I think we are very adaptable, and I think we do mutate, and I think it's one of the most attractive things about people is that we really can change. And I like to keep myself open to change. I don't ever want to just become set in stone and just, this is how I am until the day I drop dead. It's just not who I am.
Right.
And I think that's good for one. So, but it is strange that in that process of reinventing ourselves, we can rewrite narratives. And I'm not really judging it or not. I was just more looking at that and just seeing how fascinating it is. I mean, a really extreme example is like alien abduction, Whitley Strieber, oh, I've got lost time, or oh, I remember going on a holiday, oh, there was lots of owls, oh no, actually I was in a spaceship, kind of thing. I mean, that's a very extreme, but even that is interesting. I mean, I think America in the 80s became really obsessed with this concept of screen memories and hypnotism to try and get the original memories back and stuff. And I mean, it's just a sort of super kind of expanded science fiction version of the reality of what we really are like, which is, there's certain things that we shy away from. There's certain things that we build up in our minds. And that doesn't have to be amoral, and it doesn't even have to be sinister. It's just how we build our day to day. And that's interesting.
So just given the choice, do you think you personally would prefer to remember things photographically exactly as they happened, or do you like the fact that that it's malleable?
I don't think I have a choice, is what I'm saying. I don't think I have a choice. Okay. I'm always interested in truth, whatever that is. I mean, so I find it really fascinating, as I say, when I went back to these diaries a couple of years ago. It was one of the inspirations for this book, and just reading certain things. It was actually just more about people I'd met and thoughts about them at the time. That was just so interesting, because it's just that they become so colored by later, and things I knew about them later, that I was really surprised by my initial thoughts about them, because I thought that, maybe for instance, like always felt very, very close to them, and actually realizing that at first I'd maybe had issues with them and didn't feel, and then actually that grew, or the opposite. And then that started me thinking about like how interesting is it I've kind of backwritten the story. So it's not really even about a preference. It's just about that. I think that's how people work, and that's interesting to me. And obviously it's science fiction, so it's kind of turned up to like 1000% in this particular book.
Fascinating. Okay, let's concentrate back on the book itself. Sorry, because we, as always with these interviews, I like to just see where they'll go. And sometimes you end up not kind of concentrating on the comic, but it is a terrific comic, which I really enjoyed. And to talk about the team first of all, how did you find Ricardo Carbral, the artist on this?
So what did you guys get together? Pleasure to work with him. I must say he was incredible. So interestingly, we've just been to Thought Bubble, which we were discussing before the interview, which was absolutely amazing. Cheers to those guys. Wow, they did such a good job. And and Ricardo came with me, and we had our very, very first copies of Wiper. In fact, we sold them on the Saturday and the Sunday, and Ricardo saw it for the first time in print on the Saturday morning as we opened boxes. It was really exciting. And so we met there sort of pre-pandemic, a few years before the pandemic, at Thought Bubble, and we were introduced by Paul Gravett, who's a dear friend and a comic book critic and writer. and introduced, obviously very similar people, introduced Neil Gaiman to Dave McKean, actually, Borgovat did. So he's always hooking people up like this. You know, that's what he's well known for. And so he introduced me and Ricardo, and we'd always wanted to collaborate, but we put some pitches together, which we sent off to some companies in the US, and nothing had really sort of come together. But when I got the commission from Dark Horse to do Wiper, I went to him, and it was just really, really good timing, and he took it on. And so that's how that started. It was a massive labor of love. I mean, it was one of the positive things about the pandemic, and I don't think there's many of them, but was that I got the commission during lockdown, and then Ricardo and I started working sort of as the pandemic was sort of, you know, as we were starting to open up, but then there were lockdowns, and I mean, everything was very stop and start. And so we had this amazing amount of time to work on this book. And so, you know, I think I presented him initially with about 800 reference images from kind of what her boots looked like. I mean, it really was way over like what her boots looked like, what her clothes looked like, what her apartment looked like, you know, because that's what this book was about. I mean, I have to say, equal to the narrative, at least equal to the narrative. Some would even argue more, and I hope that doesn't impact the story negatively. I don't think it does, because I'm very proud of the story, and I love the story, and I love the characters, and I hope there's a bit of humor in there for people, because again, I love that about 2000 AD, is that however dark the story was, there was always a kind of edge of humor. Also, that Justice League run that Giffen, no, what was it?
JLI, yeah.
Yeah, that JLI. Who was it? It was
Giffen and JM DeMatteis.
Yes, I love that series because it's so funny, some of it, and like the interactions of the characters are such fun. And so I was drawing on all of those things for this. But as important as all of that was the world, I mean, for me, the world building was absolutely equal to the narrative. And that is where Ricardo just went beyond. I mean, you know, sometimes I will look at an issue, I mean, at an issue, I'll look at a scene from Wiper, which, you know, I've seen it a couple of times, the artwork and the pages. But I'll still sometimes look and see some bizarre alien in the background doing something very strange. Have a giggle. I'm just like, what is happening back there? And I had such a nice chat in a thought bubble with Jim Campbell, who's the Eisner-nominated letterer who did Wiper, and he just said he's never had such difficulty trying to place words, because he was just like, oh no, I can't, like that's the right place, but I cannot bizarre alien. I'll put it, no, but then that blocks the shoe. No, I'll put it, no, but then I lose the spaceship. So, you know, that was so Ricardo did make his job very difficult for that. He just crams it with his detail. And for me, that's one of the greatest pleasures of the book. It's just, you know, you just roam around in this world, and the architecture and the cars and the fashion and the creatures. I could just spend all my time doing that, you know.
Fantastic.
Yeah, he did a great job. He did an absolutely fantastic job.
And did the rest of the team sort of come together quite quickly after that, once you'd found Ricardo?
Well, Jim has always been very kind, because, you know, he certainly can command a much bigger salary than what we can on this book. But Jim's always been very, very kind to me, and has always supported my project. So I'm very grateful to him. What a fantastic guy he is. And then Brad Simpson was like was another whole kettle of fish. I mean, it was a very, very difficult book to color. You know, I was lucky enough that with Tumult, working with Mike Kennedy, Mike colored his own book, beautifully done. A rather insane thing to do. Just way too much work for one person to do. But Ricardo, you know, couldn't do that in terms of what he was doing in terms of drawing and coloring. Thank God, because it probably would have broken his mind. So he needs to get a colorist, and it was really tricky because, again, his material is so dense and so complex that it's very easy to drown. Like, as soon as you start coloring it, you're sort of diminishing the artwork in a way. It's really weird. It was like, I honestly, when we had a big stack of pages from Ricardo and we hadn't got a colorist yet, I was almost like, I just don't know that any coloring isn't just going to diminish this work. I don't think anybody can.
I think that's true of a lot of comics, though. I mean, you see a lot of very beautiful inked line work, and you're like, although, and that's not to say colorists are bad, because they're not. They're amazing.
But it can diminish the work. I mean, it really,
Yeah.
you know, we're grown-ups here, we can say it. It's like it can diminish the work. I mean, there's some extremely talented colorists, but it can. And so when we found Brad, I was in a state of kind of anxiety about it. Ricardo, I don't think, knows the word anxiety. So he wasn't. Most laid back man I've ever met. But I had enough anxiety for both of us. That was fine. And Brad was incredibly sensitive and incredibly patient with, I was going to say us, but let's just be honest and say me. In that, you know, we had a conversation initially. We were introduced by Danny. He'd worked with her on Coffin Bound and various other things. And
I
Danny,
love her work.
She's an artist I just adore.
Staggering stuff, yeah.
Staggering. She's one of the great beauties in comics as well. She's absolutely gorgeous and fabulous and intelligent and all those things. I just adore her.
I've only met her once and just found her actually, you know, very wonderful and very alive, you know, and just, you know.
She's such fun. She's such fun. And so she said, I think I've got somebody for you. Look at Brad's work. And I immediately connected with it because he's got a real sort of boldness and a real kind of not wanting to sound too much like a wanker too late, but like he's got like a subjectivity in his coloring. So it's like he's not coloring like realistically, but he's also not coloring like completely unrealistically. Like there's a nice cinematic, he does a gleam, he does a good like sense of like light tone. So he's got a really nice balance. And I almost felt it was quite the first Blade Runner. That kind of feeling of like neon and colors and stuff. But then, you know, he can also do kind of more straightforward cinematic stuff. So I'd come up with this term, which was tropical noir, which was like I sort of envisioning sort of Blade Runner, but in sort of Ghana in the 1930s. You know,
okay, that's interesting. Yeah,
nightclubs on the beach with sort of seedy, you know, messed up, broken neon on kind of old, rotting, you know, sort of palm trees and stuff. So I was sort of driving on this idea and then trying to make that into science fiction, and that was kind of what me and Brad started driving on. It was something that, you know, I've been discussing a lot with Ricardo as well. And so he was very patient, and he did a couple of passes that we were like, oh, we're not sure. And then suddenly he just got into a groove. And at that point, you know, same as with Ricardo, you know, me sending him reference images, and then at some point he's sending me stuff back and I'm like, okay, I actually can't. I mean, I don't even know how you've done this or where you're going. I just need to sit back and just enjoy the ride. And we're similar with Brad, you know. One of the great intelligences that I think he did, which I really admired in this book, was how the book is kind of like a progression. It's almost like a sort of reverse Dante's Inferno. You know, she's almost sort of descending into this kind of more and more extreme world. But in a way, it's actually inverted because she's actually almost sort of reaching paradise in a way. Follow her path. And I think what Brad does with the coloring is he just keeps cranking it up. You know, you start on Earth and she goes up to the Hive, which is like a space station. And then she goes into Acadia, which is the kind of good, dreamy sort of, you know, Hieronymus Bosch, Garden of Unearthly Delights, kind of ice cream colors side. And then she goes into Tentacle Town and everything's becoming much denser and more sort of really extreme colors. And then she sort of goes beyond that in the end. And I love the way that Brad almost broke that up into color chapters. So you sort of follow these different spaces that become more and more intense as you kind of reading your way through them.
It's interesting looking at this work in comparison to what's kind of gone before in terms of Tumult, because I would say, if I know you're a film lover, I'm a film lover. So, I mean, it feels like Tumult was the art movie. And this is the kind of big budget sci-fi movie. I mean, we talked about Blade Runner and things like that. And I would say the influences in the book are a lot more film than comics. Where were you drawing the influences from primarily in terms of stuff you were watching?
Well, you say that. I mean, they are and they aren't. I mean, Actually, I would say my biggest influences were 2000 AD.
So it was just solely 2000, and I don't mean that solely, but
Pat Mills, ABC Warriors, especially the Bisley stuff, Nemesis, Tyranny Rex, which I think is a wildly underrated comic in 2000 AD. So what I'm saying is that was absolutely equal to things like Blade. I mean, Blade Runner is a very easy example to use, and it's one that I use myself. People are always like, "Oh, I hope you don't mind us comparing it to Blade Runner." Like, and it's like, well, of course not, because obviously that's reference. Because, I mean, it's a private investigator in the future. But having said that, there's a reason why those genres go together, and Blade Runner is the most famous example. But I mean, there's a million examples of it, and there's a reason for it, I think, which is, I think of all the genres, science fiction and film noir are two of the most modern. They're both genres that were created in urban scientific spaces, science era.
Right,
and the two fit together unbelievably easily. Like they basically are the same genre in a way. I mean, obviously you get space opera and you get war. You have your sort of daring do, and that's more sort of Star Wars. But like an isolated individual navigating their way through a futuristic world, kind of just is film noir.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think next work is that.
I think you definitely. Sorry, I'm sorry.
No.
You're definitely onto something there. I think that's a fascinating way to put it.
I mean, the other thing is, like, we both like film, and I actually think a lot of people who love comics love film because we're visual people. We love visual narratives. But I went to film school and I studied film, and the reason I did that is because I couldn't study comics. So it's funny how that was.
Okay.
I was obsessed with comics as a kid, to the point where when I was 11 years old, I was actually dreaming in comic book panels with captions. I mean, I was obviously reading too many comics, although I don't have to say that to you, since you're probably the only person who reads more comics than I do. So,
well, when I can.
I've seen your reading list, so it's like there's always just like mountains around you. And, so I have to say, that's why I studied film, and then I worked in film. I did stuff like I was involved in casting on Sexy Beast, and I've worked with various people in film. And then, but I found myself, despite myself, being drawn back to comics because they're my first love. So the two come together very, very easily. And let's look at Blade Runner. Let's look at Alien. Let's look at Dune. These all came from the flip book, comic book that Jodorowsky put together, which then he ended up adapting into Inkle with Mobius. So one can argue that all of those films were really adapted from comics. And so those, nothing can stop the flow. The spice must flow. So those cross pollinations are really fecund, and the fact that the comic industry in itself is probably in a much worse state than it was a few decades ago, and it's being supported and possibly being fed upon by like some sort of giant vampiric parasite by Hollywood. So these two forms are still very intricately linked, and positively and negatively linked together, and you kind of can't take them apart from each other anymore. Certainly not now.
No, you're completely right, because as you say, it becomes a circular kind of pool of influence, really, which is kind of fascinating to dive into. And where does it begin? You just don't know anymore. It's so kind of it's really hard to pinpoint the sort of exact thing where someone goes, that's it.
That's right. And even with oneself, Paul, I mean, I can sit here and talk about all these influences and stuff, but the really fun thing to do, and I felt it with Tumult and I feel it with Wiper, is that the really fun thing is at the end, you sit back and you have really lovely conversations that we're having with friends, about the book, and you start unpacking this stuff. But the reality is, when you're writing, or I certainly, maybe I'm just like not a very conscious writer, but you don't really know what you're writing about until the end, when you look
Right.
at it, you can unpack these influences. I mean, I just started with this concept of, this private investigator who's basically investigating something, which you find out in the end, which I'm not going to say because I don't want to spoil it for the readers. But that was my opening point when I got that twist, because noir, it's almost like a comedy twist, although it's not very comedy, but it was almost like noir is always about, there's always this twist. So I almost came up with the most ludicrous twist you could possibly come up with. It's like the most extreme investigation twist that you could possibly have. And then I kind of worked back down from there, and then just really got into the world, So it was quite a basic setup, actually, and I just enjoyed the ride. And that's kind of what I hope people do. I mean, I sometimes think in this day and age, there's like sometimes an over complexity of narrative, and I haven't really done that with this book. I don't like it to be too complicated. I just quite like getting to know your characters, moving through a world with a good payoff. I don't need sort of 53. Oh my God, I thought that, and now everything's complete. I just find that a bit showy, actually.
There is something to be said for that. I agree with you there. I think there's a lot of kind of reliance on trying to make characters be everything to everybody, and it's just like,
and also complication is not intelligence.
No.
The fact that something's unbelievably complicated and kind of complex, I mean, that doesn't make something intelligent to me. I mean, the great noirs, like if one's going to discuss that, and I guess that runs through so much of my books, like Tumult, but even this one, look at something like Blue Velvet. I think that's one of the greatest noirs, one of the greatest stories told, and it's actually a very basic story. And same with Blade. It's very simple, and it's very beautiful for that. You're not scratching your head all the way through, going, "Oh my God, what's going on?" It's very clear what's going on all the way through. You're just in the rhythm of it.
There's emotional complexity in those things, though, and in Wiper too. So I think that's important. It's important to kind of deal with the emotional levels of that people can go through. So in terms of making new memories, John, what's next for you? What can we look forward to from you? Are you working on something new?
Yes, Ricardo and I have got another commission from Dark Horse to do a horror series.
Fantastic.
So it's going to be 4 issues. We're just going to start working on that once we've pushed Wipe out onto the river, and we can watch the boat go off downstream, and then we're going to get our heads into it. So we'll start working on that in the new year, and then we'll be able to date that, and we'll start discussing that then. But yeah, we're really excited to do that. We've had such fun working together, and so we can't wait to do that. Yeah, so, another genre. It's like, so Tumult was probably sort of like a kind of modern. Well, I mean, there's similarities. I mean, there's sort of a modern noir, and then Wiper's science fiction, but there's still a kind of bridge to that noir material. And this one is not noir exactly, but it's a sort of a contemporary horror. And there's a couple of parallels. I'm really excited to discuss it with you. I won't get too far into it now.
No. Let's kind of put a pin in it and talk about it when it's out, because I would love to have you back on. As you pointed out at the beginning, I always enjoy these conversations. So in the immediate future,
yes,
tomorrow night, 7 till 9. If you're watching this on Wednesday,
please, anybody come down and join us. It'd be fantastic. They always do a really good thing at Gosh. It's always just so nice to do it there. I mean, Gosh is the comic book shop that I was going to. When I lived over in South Africa, if anyone went to England, I'd always give this list for people to go over to Gosh, like when it was still opposite the British Museum. And so, it's really like it's got such a special place in my heart. So it's lovely celebrating there. There's going to be some really interesting people coming down, and it's always really exciting to just have new people who I haven't met who just want to come down and who are curious to check it out. So come and have a glass of wine with us.
Yeah, it would be good. Like the Gosh launches are always good fun. I'm usually working the other side of the counter, but I'm hoping to get down and actually come and see you in this one. We'll see how it goes. But
the artists will be there. So Ricardo's over from Lisbon, and Paul
fantastic.
Is coming and introducing us. So there'll be lots of other creators there. mean, I think that sense of community is important as well. I think Gosh is really good at that. Something I really felt at Thought Bubble is I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that until I started kind of going out a bit more and hanging out with people. You know, it's very easy to just be in one's own bedroom in inverted commas, like as a comics reader or as a comics creator. And it's actually really important to get out there and make connections and just, it's very energizing. So, you know, come down and do that with us.
I'm really pleased for you, John. I'm so happy this book is out there, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes next from you. So Thursday night, 7 till 9 p.m. Gosh Comics, #1 Berwick Street, in Soho, in London. If you're in town, drop on by and say hello to John and Ricardo.
I guess the other thing just to mention is that, you know, I think there's a special book plate that Ricardo's done, especially for Gosh. They'll be signed, and there's bits and pieces as well, special things that will be in Gosh that Ricardo's done some, I think, screen printed, very special kind of editions and things. I mean, very limited editions. So you know, get down there for some collectibles too.
I will chuck a link to the pre-orders for the signed copies in this. So hopefully you'll be watching that tonight. As I say, it's Wednesday now. Tomorrow is the launch. John, if I don't get to see you there, I hope I will. If I don't get to see you there, I really hope you have fun, and I hope it makes a big splash. And I'm sorry not to have got down to Thought Bubble to see it launch there. But next year maybe. I'm fingers crossed for next year, and hopefully we'll be talking about a whole new book then.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Well, John, thank you so much for taking the time. Thanks to everyone for watching. Remember, support us on Patreon, and you can follow us at The Comic Crush on Twitter and Instagram. We're also on Facebook, and subscribe to the channel and like and share and do all that stuff. We'll see you soon.
Keep up the good work, man. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, John. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.